Hi, my name is Melissa Tomlinson. I'm a member of the Green Party, and I'm also a member of an organization, and I'm going to curse just a little bit in church. It's called Badass Teachers Association. I run that organization. It's a national public education advocacy organization. So I come here from a different viewpoint, and I'm going to be honest and say this is not the normal crowd that I'm used to speaking in front of. Normally my crowd is, yeah, come on, let's go, Black Lives what? Matter. And that's what brings me here today, because Black lives do matter. So I want to tell you a story about myself. The work I did started out in public education, and we started to analyze what was going on in schools and what privatization of public schools were doing to our public school systems. And as we began to trace through the history and the roots and take a look at what brought us to this point, we began to see the systemic racism and injustices that were brought down upon our children generations after generations and after generations. Brown versus Board of Education, it still exists. Our schools are still segregated. Housing, our communities are still segregated. Businesses, our work environments are still segregated. And as we begun to reel on this, we took up a new mantle more than just public education. We took up the mantle of racial injustice and fighting against it. So I'm going to share with you what I experienced this weekend, kind of leading up to that with our last election. Like many of you, I woke up that morning in tears, absolute tears, absolute sickness. And what I felt wasn't even half of what a person of color or an immigrant felt. And I still, to this day, have not even said his name. And then I went to school. And as I walked by the front hallway where students were coming in to one of the entrances, a whole group of students were cheering for the fact that he had won the election. It was at that moment that I realized that we can no longer whitewash our history and our schools, that we can no longer speak to our students about the issues that are going on in society, because if we remain silent, we will not bring about change that we want to see for our future generations. So bringing me up to this weekend, I spent a lot of time trying to speak to white women in my circles, particularly online, because I was doing a lot of work getting ready for classes. And we had the same arguments that we've been having in the past. Well, what about this? Well, what about me? Well, what about my history? And I had to completely, over and over again, remind them that this was not about them. White supremacy is not about the oppression of white people. It is not about what else may have happened in the past. It is about the direct oppression of people of color. And that does not mean that there are not lessons to learn from other people's histories. The fact that we have forgotten that the message that the survivors of the Holocaust have told us and have tried to carry forth with us, it has brought us to the neglect that we are responsible for today. So Sunday night, I joined the community of Millville for a vigil. And again, I expected my usual protests, screaming, whose streets? Our streets. Instead, what I was met with a very loving community. So the floor was opened up for everybody to share their story. No prompting, no speeches written. It was just a true, heartfelt telling of stories from people of color, from Mexican immigrants, from Muslim females, from LGBTQ community, and from white people, sharing their stories and creating a common bond. As we went across the street into a empty lot that's in the center of town, we formed a circle, and the storytelling continued. What brought you here today? As I was listening to the stories, I tend to wander my mind a little bit. I watched a group of youth on their bikes come up to the street and stop. All my heart, I wanted to reach out to them and invite them to join us. But knowing of the tension that was in that community after this weekend, I did not. they talked amongst themselves, they made a couple jokes, and they rode away. And in that moment right there, I realized that we are still failing to include our youth in our spaces so that we can teach the lessons that need to be taught. I realized that we need to keep doing what we're doing out in public and do it more so that the youth can watch and join in and learn. I realized that as we grow our safety networks in our communities, that this is where the real work begins, that it's not unless we strengthen the bonds within our communities and build up that base that we need to build to hold each other dear and to be strong for each other, that we will be able to fight against what has happened and what will continue to happen until we learn. Thank you.